Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee with Craig, where we talk about all things firearms, firearms policy, politics, culture, media, you name it. We're talking about it right here on Coffee with Craig. So take a moment, like and share the program. Whether you're watching us on YouTube, please make sure to subscribe, or you're watching us on Facebook, please make sure to follow us so that you can get the alerts as soon as we go live. Also, if you just want to listen to us, we're on Apple Podcast, Apple iTunes. We're also on Google Podcast, Spotify, a number of different services. Just check it out. You can just listen to the audio version of this program. Also, take a moment. Please go to fpcgear.com, fpcgear.com. I know you guys are always looking for cool T-shirts. I know you're looking for coffee mugs, hoodies, all sorts of different things so that you can show your support for the Second Amendment. Well, here, not only can you show your support for the Second Amendment, but you also actually are going to be supporting the Second Amendment because every dollar that you spend there goes right back into the fight for our right to keep and bear arms, so you can support the Second Amendment and you can look good doing it. That's fpcgear.com. All right, you guys know the primary reason we exist is to help you keep up on what's going on legislative and help you to be able to fight for our right to keep and bear arms, whether it's in the courts or in the legislatures. And now all the legislatures are now starting to gear up, and you're starting to hear a lot about legislation that's coming up. We've been talking about for the last few years, since 2016, in particular, the fight here on the West Coast, because we have states in Washington, in Oregon, in Nevada, in Arizona, and New Mexico. You have legislators who are saying that they want to build a West Coast wall of gun control, basically taking California and, Californicating gun control, gun laws throughout the Northwest. So with that, we have with us a special guest, a friend of the program, but also a strong advocate and member of the Firearms Policy Coalition, the legislative advocate for the state of Washington and the state of Oregon, to talk to us about what's going on in the great Northwest. So with that, we have our good friend. Now, there's Punxsutawney Phil, who talks about, whether or not we're going to see more winter. Well, here we're going to have Phil, who's going to tell us whether or not we're going to have more gun control in the Pacific Northwest. So welcome, Phil. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I am doing excellent. How are things going up in the Pacific Northwest?
Well, we're in the middle of a big snowstorm right now, so it's looking like 6 more weeks of winter.
Oh joy! That does not sound like fun. So, tell us: are we looking at anti-gun winter, or are we looking at maybe a free spring of liberty in the states of Washington and Oregon?
Well, that has yet to be determined. In Washington, we've got a new Democratic legislature here and Democratic Senate. As well as in Oregon, there's been some move toward the Democratic side, with Democratic legislators winning big last year in the election down there as well. So even though there's big wins on the D side up here in both states, it's still questionable on what the critical mass is going to be and what the bills that are palatable to them actually are, because there's always that back and forth here in Washington and Oregon between the swing districts and how much gun control is palatable to these Democrats in swing districts, and what are the House speakers and majority leaders going to tolerate when it comes to actually passing legislation. So there is still some questions that have yet to be answered up here, and not all is up for debate yet. There hasn't been an assault weapon ban hearing in either state this year, so there is that. So there's still some hesitation on at least a few of the minds down in the legislatures here in Washington and Oregon.
Okay, so let's talk then a little bit about what's actually already been introduced. Let's go ahead and start with the state of Washington. What are some of the bills that we're looking at that have already been introduced? And I understand things have really kind of started already. I don't want to say moving, but the process has already started churning there in the state of Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. There's three big critical bills here in Washington State, and number one is the 3D printed gun bill, which is sort of a Trojan horse bill because it makes any gun part whatsoever contraband, and that's SB 5061. And that's a big bill, and it passed in the Senate Law and Justice Committee, and it's eligible for a floor vote upon passage from the Rules Committee. So that's a big one. And SB 5062 and its House companion 1068 have both passed the Law and Justice and the House counterpart committee here in Washington State, and that's the magazine ban. So that's a big deal as well, limiting your magazine capacity to 10 rounds and not letting you exit the house with any magazines that you may already own. So
it doesn't even grandfather in. Well, let me clarify. It'll grandfather them in to the point where if you own it, you don't have to get rid of it, but you can't take it outside of your house. Right?
Correct. It basically becomes contraband that you have to lock up if the bill passes as written, and so that's why that bill is a pretty big deal, and we're definitely talking to people on that bill and trying to take the temperature of where that's going, and if that's going to go to a floor vote. So it's still up in the air right now, and there's people proposing different amendments and things like that for both of those bills. And the third bill, which is a critical bill, which passed the Senate Law and Justice Committee, is SB 5174. And what that will do is implement a training mandate if you want to try to get or renew a concealed carry permit. And that's a big issue here in Washington State because they're trying to outlaw ranges right now in several of these municipalities. It's been a big fight for years, and they're using several different regulatory.
They're using zoning. It's not just happening there in Washington. It's happening all over, including here in California. It's amazing how many ranges are either being shut down or being highly restricted as a result of it. I mean, you go to the Bay Area, there's almost no place to go to train.
Wow. Yeah. Well, they're trying to do that here as well, and it's sort of a backdoor ban on carry as far as I see it. So. That's a big deal as well. That bill 5174 here in Washington State, absolutely.
All right. So let's talk Oregon, and we know there's one pretty big nasty one there, and then there's obviously some others. So let's talk about the big nasty SB. Is it 501?
Correct. SB 501 is a big giant gun control bill and gun licensing scheme, and what that would essentially do is limit you to 5 rounds, no matter what kind of firearm you have whatsoever. Limit you to 5 rounds in any firearm, and also limit you to.
Wait. Let me go back on that. Any firearms, or is that the magazine capacity? So what if you have a revolver that holds 6? Are you now only allowed to have 5 rounds in there at one time?
That's a good question. So.
Okay.
I mean, it's a pretty ridiculous bill.
Yeah.
I mean, just all around, and that's not the only thing it does. It limits you to purchasing 20 rounds of ammunition a month. Okay, so even if you're target shooting or whatever, you can only buy 20 rounds of ammunition a month with this bill SB 501 in Oregon. I mean, it's really crazy, and of course they want to implement a bunch of other licensing measures and all kinds of other stuff with this bill. So it's a big, giant gun control bill, again, proposed in Oregon. So folks are under attack there with that one. That's the big one. And then there's 2251, which is at the request of Kate Brown, the governor there, and that's very similar to 1639 here in Washington State, which was passed by initiative last year, and it basically aims to put regulations on the books for quote unquote assault weapons and banning 18 to 21-year-olds from owning and purchasing guns. The other one is HB 2505, and that's the lock up your guns or go to jail bill.
So I had a question actually in particular, and maybe to going back to Washington real quick, the I-1639. I'm noticing that there have been multiple sheriffs, municipalities who've basically said they're not going to enforce it. How is that going over with members of the Washington State Legislature?
Well, I think obviously it's very popular and very welcomed by people who support the Second Amendment and Article 1, Section 24 of our Washington State Constitution. And obviously, some folks on the other side of that equation are very uneasy about that, and they're not sure probably what's going to happen. So there's all kinds of activity at the county level here by sheriffs and also county councilmen trying to figure out what they're going to do with 1639 here, and whether they're going to implement it, and whether also they have the means to implement it. This is a huge cost burden on these local municipalities and law enforcement agencies, as well as an enforcement issue for law enforcement agencies that have some misgivings about of this bill. So it's a big deal right now. It's in the news here every single day. And I don't think the controversy about it is going to die down anytime soon.
Well, let me ask you, looking at the two states, I mean, and once again, understanding that both of them took a step towards the left, but I mean, how would you break down both the citizenry and then the legislative bodies when it comes to, say, a percentage, pro-gun versus pro-gun control? Just to give people an idea of, one, is there a big divide between the people and the elected representatives? And then number two, how close of a fight actually is it?
I think it's much closer than a lot of people think. I see a lot of very worried comments and people almost giving up online when I look at social media and forums and stuff like that. It's much closer than people actually think. People who have run these groups that are running these initiatives here in Washington and Oregon have been very clever to try to disguise their gun control bills as background checks and things like that. And that's what polls very well. But as they start going down the list of gun control items, the support wanes. And when you start getting into these swing districts and more rural areas here in Washington State, the appetite for hardcore gun control really goes down. The same in Oregon. I mean, you've got a few districts there around big cities like Portland that really do support gun control, but when you start getting out into the suburbs, the support for that goes way down. So I think it's closer than a lot of people think, and that's one reason why here in the Washington State Legislature and Oregon Legislature, there hasn't been votes on some of these bigger gun control measures through, especially the past couple of years. The appetite for it isn't necessarily there when you go outside of big cities like Seattle and Portland.
Right, but I think what you find though is a lot of these guys, they get their big press release, they get into the news media, and they get to say they introduced this, even if it doesn't go anywhere. They still pacify the anti-gun people who spent a lot of energy and money to actually get them elected. And then once again, it doesn't seem like in some of those cases, like it's such a priority that they're willing to take their other priorities and throw them under the bus in order to try and get some of this stuff passed.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, for every action, there's an equal reaction, and I think there is still a lot of hesitation here in Washington and Oregon on what will the campaign consequences be if these representatives vote for some of the more extreme measures that are proposed every year by folks like AG Bob Ferguson here in Washington State, um, and Kate Brown down there in Oregon. So there's still a few legislators who aren't 100% on board with all of it. They know their district, they know their constituency, but it's still up in the air, and we'll be waiting here and talking to people on the ground just to see what's going on as well throughout this legislative session here.
All right. Now, you guys, as you guys all know, we have all of these bills and more in the state of Washington, Oregon, and a bunch of other states are there on our website, firearmspolicy.org/actions. You can go to you can click on the Washington tab, you can click on the Oregon tab. It'll take you right to all the bills that are there. And you can actually send your message letting people know, letting the legislators there know how you feel about this particular legislation. But before I ask you to do that, Phil, we've been doing this now a few years, and legislators there should be getting used to getting the messages from our folks. Does that have any impact, or what kind of impact does it have on them and their decisions?
Oh, it means the world. Honestly, if you have nobody that sends anything in on a bill, then legislators are going to automatically think that nobody cares if it passes or not. The more people that send more things in opposing a bill, the better. I see a lot. I know I said before, but some of these people that comment online, my legislators don't care. That's just not true, especially here at the state level. Certain districts, the representatives may not care if you're for example, like a downtown Seattle type district, but in other areas, it really does matter. And I think if you use FPC's website and contact your legislators on some of these bills, preferably all of them, then you're going to find an impact. The more people do that, the more it gets legislators' attention. So I think it's a really big deal that if you're a supporter of FPC and you haven't written into your state level legislator this year, you should definitely think about doing that.
Oh, yeah. No, and we make it real simple. Look, there's already a message there. You can change that message and put in your own message, however you want it to be. But the thing that I try and tell folks is this, and this is, once again, I've worked in the legislature, California legislature, almost 10 years, is number one is, that sheer volume of communication raises the level of that bill on their priority list, because they're like, okay, I'm getting a ton of communication on this. What are people saying? In particular, if those people are my constituents, that raises it then even to another level. So if you live in Washington, if you live in Oregon, it's even more important that you make sure that your voice is heard. But even coming from outside the state of California, if you can take a minute, if you live in California, Oregon, if you live in Texas or Utah, take a second. Still make sure that they get a chance to hear from you. Once again, the sheer volume of those communications can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of an old-fashioned poll, if you will, and I mean, down to where people write into their district, their state, or if people are showing up at their legislative hearings and stuff like that. These legislators definitely note that, and it's just because you may not hear anything back, or you may just get a form email or form letter back, doesn't mean that your voice hasn't been heard. And it's a very important step to take to petition your government. So that's why we have the right to do that, and it really does matter. And these people do pay attention to you. when you write in, especially if there's more than one of us that write in. I can tell you that from talking to these people all the time.
Excellent. Excellent. Phil, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for all the work that you're doing up there in the Pacific Northwest. We'll look forward to another update from you in the future, hopefully where all of this stuff is dead.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. Thank you, Craig.
All right, sir. You take care. All right, folks. Well, hey, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. We thank you guys so much for tuning in. As I said before, please take a minute, go to FPC, Firearms Policy Coalition, or firearmspolicy.org/actions. Make sure you get your word in. Make sure the folks up there in Washington and in Oregon know how you feel about the West Coast wall of gun control. Also, please take a moment, like and share this program. Let your friends know about the Firearms Policy Coalition. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.